what I'll do is I'll start with Bob Rabbit, co-founder at Rabbit Hutch Farm. One of the questions or things that come to mind in terms of food, Bob, and not only is food your friend, probably lots of different perspectives out there on how to attain and then maintain the quality and more importantly, or most importantly, nutrients in the food. Does it start with the health of the soil? And if it does start with the health of the soil, what are your perspectives on that point? Is the starting point the health of the soil?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because I've as I've gotten more into the farming practices, which is a strong word for it. So it's I'm on a 6 acre property. You have a fairly large garden, number of animals and things that we utilize, and been there about 3 years now. And as I've personally gone through and understood more and more, to your point about not just where our food comes from, but maintaining healthy food. It may seem obvious, but it is interesting how maybe we don't understand that, yes, it does think about healthy food, it does start in the soil. It isn't necessarily the fact that, hey, I'm growing a tomato or basil or whatever the case may be. From a kind of a management practice perspective, that soil health is so important because you can, and Cindy probably knows even more than I do about this from a technical level, but in terms of what I've come to understand and learn more and more is your soil health determines the nutrient level of the food that you're eating. Again, which may seem obvious to some folks, and I think we all kind of conceptually understand it, but what does that really mean, right? When you look at specifically the soil levels and the nutrient health of the soil that you're planting in has a direct impact of how nutritious the food is that you're eating as well. So that's a long way of saying yes, absolutely. It's actually critical to the whole chain, is starting with that soil health. And the example that I've heard many times is you can have two gardens right next to each other, have a tomato from each garden that looks the same, but depending on the health of the soil that tomato comes from, you'll have significantly different levels of nutrient values within that same plant that looks the same. It can look exactly the same, but the nutrient value that your body can uptake, based on that is wild, can be wildly different depending on the health soil.
Soil essential for fortifying whatever it is you're producing, growing, producing the nutrients. So it's the nutritious value. If the food has been stripped of its nutrients, then that doesn't bode too well for us ingesting that food because essentially we're just ingesting nothing. I mean,
Nothing,
we're
or
ingesting
or
something,
or yeah,
but
you're missing components. So as an example, one of the things I've had to learn here, where we're at, so we have a single horse. We have a horse. We are blessed to have a horse, so we get some good manure, which ultimately we can use as compost and utilize for the garden. The problem is if that's your only single source of compost, you can actually, again, skew your nutrient values because, horse waste is high in, and I'm not going to remember all the exact minerals and deposits and things, but it's going to be high in a certain area and low in another area, just due to the nature of how that works, right? And so to your point is you think you're eating something healthy, you think you're getting maybe the vitamins and minerals that you would like to have, and you're not, right? And again, that can be very, even if you're trying to do the right things, so to speak, from a soil health perspective.
so we just put out there kind of a challenging scenario for most people because we have the people out there, thankfully, who are producing the food. But then all of us as consumers, depending on what types of food we have access to, how do we know if the food we're actually buying and purchasing has been stripped of its nutritional value? So I'm just going to kind of table that, more of a rhetorical question. And I know many of us here today are thinking about that. That's just one of the challenges that we're faced with in today's society. It doesn't really matter where you live, ensuring that we have healthy, nutritious food. Over to Cindy. Cindy, relative to what Bob was just talking about with nutritional value, the food is grown, it's ready to be picked and cropped, and then it goes out to hopefully local farmers or local farm markets where people can actually, if they have that accessibility, purchase directly from the farmers, right? But not all of us are that lucky and fortunate for various reasons. And I don't want to get into that. That's another discussion, especially here in the US. Once it gets to your favorite market and wherever you purchase your food from, how do you ensure that not only there is nutritional value, but I know you're mitigating against different types of bacteria harm us far worse than not having nutritional value. So it's nutritional value that could be further compounded by listeria, E. coli, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think when you go to the produce, the supermarkets over in Holland are now starting to lean towards more organic produce in the shops. So when you, for instance, now that's a cabbage time, like the red cabbage and the white cabbage, that's the time to harvest now, or the pumpkin. They have made an initiative to have more of organic produce in the supermarkets. So there's where it starts. And then when I make some foods, I try to get the best. And even though it's really funny to say, sometimes we work with frozen foods because frozen foods are directly harvested and then have little production process. It's only cutting, washing, and freezing. And sometimes they even have more nutritional value than canned food or even fresh food. And it's really funny thing to say because you don't think about that. In frozen food, there's more nutritional value. Recent research has proved, and also the period behind us where we are having the difficult times, we are buying more of frozen foods now than canned. And fighting against bacteria, yeah, you have to fight against some bacteria that can easily harm you. You have to do it in a way that also all the nutritionous values in the products are still there. It's more like a balance when you put a little bit of preservative in the foods, so it can stay for long because we don't want to have shelf life of 2 days. Everybody wants to have a shelf life of a week or something. And yeah, that's a balance, and we have to keep in mind that nutritionist value is overall the main thing that you have to keep.
Very interesting about frozen foods, because some of us, depending on your age and time frame that you grew up in, frozen food was very, very popular for various reasons. And then it just kind of went into a decline. And I don't know, maybe over the past 10 years here in the US, I'm seeing more and more of that people are inclined to purchase frozen food for the very reasons that you mentioned, in terms of just mitigating against E. coli, listeria, but also maintaining that nutritional value, because as soon as it's cropped, it's washed and then it's frozen. So very interesting. I want to go back to something that you brought up in terms of nutritional value and in ensuring the nutritional value. When it comes to preservatives, how do we find that balance? More so as consumers, a lot of what we purchase, it has preservatives. As consumers, how can we be maybe a little bit more aware, knowledgeable of what we're purchasing relative to the finding that balance with preservatives? You can't get away from it. It's necessary to extend the life, because you don't want it lasting for 2 days, but you don't want it lasting for a year or 2 years either, right? What is that balance for preservatives?
You find a balance, and that's me for a developer perspective, is being critical about how many preservatives you put in. You have to kill the bacteria, but also yeast and molds. So it's a combination. And with yeast and molds, it's not so hard. You can do it with vinegar. It's very natural preservative, and it works very well. For listeria, you have to do some different things. We try to be as mild as possible, and I'm developing also for the German market, and they don't want any preservatives at all. So that's more of a challenge, but we luckily find a formula with vinegar and a little bit of sugar, although it sounds not healthy. But you have to keep in mind that putting a lot of vinegar in makes it sour, and people don't want a sour taste. You can find a balance between what you put into the vinegar and also a little bit of normal sugar, and then it balances it out. And then you have a product that's totally fine for 20 days, like a hummus, without any preservatives or E numbers. It can be done, but it takes a little bit of thinking how you should do it, and also a little bit of adaptation for the taste. Everything is getting a little bit more sour. We can see that also with sliced meat and with spreadable meat we have over here in Holland. It's getting a little bit sour, but that's okay if you can think there's less preservatives and you can keep that fresh feeling.
I love that fresh
Yeah.
feeling. You mentioned vinegar and sugar. Sugar can be problematic.
Yeah.
When you say sugar, what type of sugar are you referring to?
It can be all kinds of sugar, but if you go to agave syrup, it's the same as sugar. It's the same. So if you have date pasta, it's the same as sugar. So what you can do is balance out with 1%, and it's only 10 grams a kilo. That's very low. You can balance out that tangy, zesty feeling of the vinegar. And then you have a mouthfeel that is more warm and complex. And you have, on the other side, you have enough preservative from the vinegar to get all the bacteria out, or most of them. And with the sugar, you have a mouthfeel that is acceptable, or how do you say that? It's nice. We not talk about 20, 30%. We talk about 1% in the recipe, just to have a base, so you don't feel like when you take a bite, it's too zesty, it's too sour.
So you brought up a really good point about agave. Yes, I am the type of person that will look at the back and look at the ingredients and actually see what's in there, right? So I would just say to the entire world, if you look at the ingredients and you see agave, that's better than high fructose corn syrup, for example.
Yeah.
That's better than white bleached sugar. Other ingredients that I typically see, not only agave, I'm seeing food using monk fruit, for example, which is another sweetener. And I would say raw sugar cane as well. To Cindy's point, for those out there listening, what should we be looking for, Cindy, from a consumer perspective? What should I be looking for where I'm getting that nutritional value? I'm not poisoning myself with high fructose corn syrup and other preservatives or red dyes or all this other stuff that's out there in food, right? I'll pivot back to Bob. Soil health, going through the process. You mentioned manure. What are some of the things you're doing to ensure the health of the soil so that when you have 3, 5, 10 rows of tomatoes, and now, now we're in broccoli season here in North America, what are you actually doing to ensure the health and quality of the soil?
There's a few things, where we started was kind of ground zero. There was no garden there previously, so you had to start, and so a lot of it is just understanding what you're starting from. What are those potential deficiencies from a mineral perspective, right, that you're looking at, and doing your best to try to naturally add in components, right? Compost is the most kind of well-known type of thing, but there might be other minerals that you would spread around, spread in as needed to kind of fit for purpose. And I think time is also a factor that I like to talk about as well, is to understand that this is a process and don't get frustrated, meaning you live in an amazing climate, an amazing location, you're not going to just jump into 100% healthy soil, right? That's got the perfect level of nutrients and is ready to go. And so that amending process, restitution process, if you will, takes time. It'll take multiple seasons. Long way of saying I focus on incremental improvements versus trying to get to perfect soil health on day one. To your point, part of that is how you cultivate, right? Just how how you get the soil to where it is, which you have to in the beginning. It's people think it's like, well, I can just sow directly into the into my lawn. It's like, no, you do have to do some level of amendment. You have to get things ready. But then over time, there's a balancing act of what am I adding in and how little can I disturb that soil as well. Over time, allowing what you're planting to kind of get recycled as part of that composting process as well, right? So not necessarily ripping things out, just allowing it to, again, self-compost, if you will, and looking at those additives. So that's kind of what, the direction that we try to go, right? In terms of, getting soil to where it needs to be and paying attention. That's kind of the other funny thing is learning more and more about, you can start looking at plants and understand what the deficiency is in the soil by what the plant looks like as well. So again, all stuff that I'm learning. I'm by no means an expert, but it's interesting what you can tell the way maybe a tomato ripens. The plants a lot of times will tell you what's wrong with the soil. As you talk about preservatives and soil additives and things like that, when you amend the soil, do so in a way that is conducive to the health of the overall process, right? So not looking at artificial fertilizers and things like that, right? You're trying to use natural ones, which is a lot of times where that time component comes into play, because it's very easy to put an artificial, fertilizer down that'll work really, really quick. But
Sure.
again, you're introducing, maybe things that you don't want to. And so that's where, again, like I said, I come back to time a lot. It's the patience, it's the time to work through. And as an aside, when it comes to, where to start and how to go about it, one of my early experiences was, to your point, Sean, you'd mentioned, there's some environments where it's difficult to get to maybe a farmer's market and those type of things. Growing up, I spent 5 years in inner city Dayton, where there was a lot of blight. And we managed to petition some of our city officials to allow us to use an abandoned lot. And so we came together as as kind of a community, and we took an abandoned lot and turned it into a community garden, right? So, there are ways to mitigate that, right, from an access perspective. And even there, again, you're going to start somewhere with the soil. The main thing is just start with something and realize it's going to take you some time.
Appreciate that. Appreciate the perspectives going back to all of us as consumers. We all have our day jobs, and certainly Cindy and Bob, you do what you do relative to mitigating against, different types of bacteria and contamination of food and ensuring food safety, food quality. Bob, same thing with you. It starts with the soil. Eventually the food gets to, as you said, Bob, it will either go to a market or a local farmer's market or wherever you are purchasing your food from. It's important to understand the origins of that food, so we're making more informed decisions. I like what you said about soil and the health of the soil. Obviously, if you're using an artificial process to accelerate the cycles and accelerate the time, you're just contaminating the soil. And if you're contaminating the soil, you're contaminating the food.
I think one other piece of advice I can give, if you're asking, is you think about what can consumers do. And part of that is understand the seasonality of food as well. Here in Michigan, we're big in strawberries and some of those fruits, is understand strawberries typically come in spring. If you're looking for strawberries, that's typically the best time to get them, because they'll probably be coming from a closer source to you than, say, getting them in the dead of winter when they've probably been shipped in from overseas. And I guess my other piece of advice is think about that seasonality, food as well. And then again, using freezing techniques and preserving techniques is a great way to extend that. But again, getting that original source in season can help mitigate that as well.
I think that was a great kind of tying it all together, kind of a closing thought and perspective on that, Bob. Much appreciated. Cindy, what's a helpful tip, a parting thought for the audience?
I totally agree with the seasonality of produce. I find it now really odd to see strawberries, and I leave them in the shelf It's not good to eat them. And also have common sense. If you see something, for instance, a sausage or another product, and it lasts over more than half a year, okay, you have to think why. Eat fresh. Yeah, it's nice to have some food that can last for a long time. But if you look into that kind of food or canned food, you see a lot of strange things for ingredients to keep it longer and longer. Stay a little bit away from that and go to the butcher and go and get your fresh meat over there instead of buying something that lasts for a couple of months. It's crazy. And then you have also that's highly processed food. And that's another discussion as well. Doing your grocery with common sense, it comes to mind, and then you realize, okay, I should not buy that because it's too many ingredients, too many preservatives. And can I get a fresh alternative? I think that is the thing that you have to keep in mind when you go into the supermarket.
Well done. Appreciate that, Cindy. Yeah, I would just add, based upon what you and Bob have shared with everyone today, one thing I did not talk about is accessibility and affordability. I would say the positive, just again, lay of the land, depending on where you are, state, country, proximity, local sourcing, Bob, as you mentioned, and just seeing what options are out there for us as consumers. Certainly, depending on where you live, you may have access to farmers markets. You may have access to more supermarkets. I know, here in New York, you have different community food drives. One in particular in Manhattan is Harlem Grown. I would just say, look, as consumers, there seems to be a movement in terms of course, organic produce, that goes without saying. But yes, I understand people are probably out there thinking, well, what about affordability and accessibility? There are options. It's part of the exploratory phase. And as Bob mentioned, it's being aware as a consumer. Seasonality, I totally agree with for buying the food that's actually in season. Very much appreciate it. I'll just kind of open it up for those who are live in attendance, if there are any thoughts or questions that anyone wants to offer or add. Did have one comment come through. Thank you so much, Sean. Great discussion. Thank you from San Antonio, Texas. Soil, not oil. I love it. Yes, it's all about the soil. And I could say that too. I know Sean in particular is involved with, I believe it's the Southwest Texas Food Community Drive, and they serve, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people throughout Texas. So again, what we saw through the pandemic, catastrophic, of course. We saw the emergence of mutual aid, more food community drives, things of that nature. So I think that's something to consider and think about. But yeah, and Kika?
I think we should do another one on also to address the cross-contamination of other farms and monoculture, which is a big problem when it comes to foodborne contamination. So maybe we'll do another one to address that problem, those two problems that are inherent to big food production to be able to achieve enormous markets. And that's what most people have access to because of pricing. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. We'll leave that up in the air, food for thought. And,
I love that, Kika. Food for thought. Yeah, food is your friend, part two.
yes.
Just keep going down this path as a series. And I love that perspective on, mitigating cross-contamination and airborne diseases, things of that nature. A lot of problems, no doubt about that. But thanks to Cindy and Bob today, I believe we've scratched the surface on positive movement and solutions that are out there. They're just not talked about enough and propagated enough. So thank you both for sharing your thoughts and perspectives and expertise.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for the time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy the day.